see my hood? All right, this is gonna be my last one because I have another place to be at. Another one in Spanish.
Será recordado como el año en que te conocí, el año en que pude amarte y el año en que te perdí. Si solo tuviera un deseo, desearía tenerte otra vez. Hace tanto que no te veo y ya se me va otro mes.
Hopefully you'll come back. Okay. Victor, yeah. Yeah, Victor do a duet.
Oh yeah.
Does Victor speak Spanish?
No, but
We'll have to learn that one.
you can always.
All right, so basically we're going to start off, the way we start off our typical meetings, we just do a reading of the statement of purpose, so you can kind of get an idea of what the Zeitgeist is about if you guys are not too familiar with it. I'm pretty sure by show of hands, how many of you have seen the movies, the Zeitgeist ones? Okay, so pretty much everybody, so you kind of have a pretty good idea of what we're all about, but we'll just go through this really quickly here, and then we'll get our introductions going. So first, I'm Vince. I'm the coordinator of the group, and I just took over. And unfortunately, our other coordinator couldn't make it today. He's going to be out of the state for a while, so I'm going to cover here. So, statement of purpose: as members of the Zeitgeist movement, we affirm our greater responsibility to support global sustainability. To this end, we will work with others to increase public awareness of the inefficiencies within a monetary-based economy, transition to a resource-based economy, declare the Earth's resources as common heritage of all the world's people, utilize technology intelligently for the freeing of humanity, understand that which influences human behavior, and apply the principles of the scientific method for problem solving. As members of the Zeitgeist movement, we strive to use objectivity and encourage a positive shift in values to achieve these goals. All members are encouraged to be proactive for the larger purpose of world peace and global sustainability. All right, and so now we're going to begin with Chris. He's going to give us a little introduction to about the Zeitgeist and what it is.
Hello, everybody. All right, I'm just going to give you a little bit of history and background, kind of a little bit of evolution of how we got to where we are right now in the Zeitgeist movement. As you guys know, as you mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization. Back in 2008, it was actually started by Peter Joseph. The purpose of the Zeitgeist movement is to bring light to the primitive nature of our current economic system and to advocate for ways to make it better. That's simply it. And it's a train of thought organization, which is very different from other organizations. Traditionally, what can happen in a market economy is that an organization can start to change from its original purpose, from trying to, whether it's sustainability or fixing different problems on the earth, into kind of keeping the organization alive. Even if it doesn't need to stay alive, if it needs to evolve, if it needs to change, sometimes people get attached to keeping the organization alive instead of the original purpose. And Peter Joseph saw that in a lot of different organizations, a lot of people that work with them. We see it too. So we're not attached to this thing being just one thing, or whoever is in charge, or the leader. It is a train of thought organization, so it can change and it can adapt itself in whatever way we need to do. We can work within the market, we can work without the market, we can work with several different groups, but again, we want to stress how important it is, the flexibility of it. And so we never get stuck in one way. We can actually move to whatever we need to move to in terms of sustainability. So again, how we got to where we are right now, a lot of people know a little about Peter Joseph, but give a little background. He was a percussion artist, a filmmaker, and an advocate for a sustainable future. Back in 2007, as you guys know, he produced this live performance piece in New York called Zeitgeist, and then he put it online. Became very popular. And this piece he wasn't planning on starting this whole movement like it is right now. He was just kind of expressing his views at the time. There were 3 parts back then. You know, a lot of you guys know this already, but the first part was how the Christian religion derived from other religions. The second part was how 9/11 was an inside job. The third part was on the Federal Reserve and how it was controlled by international bankers. And a lot of people say, "Oh, I've heard about the Zeitgeist movement. You guys just, conspiracy theorists and stuff like that." And back then, it was a little bit conspiracy theories. And people get caught up in that sometimes, and they think that we just want to talk about those things. But again, being a train of thought organization, it adapted, it changed. And so Peter Joseph, after that first film, people approached him and they asked him, they said, "Hey, you talked a lot about a lot of interesting things here. We need to keep this going." So he started doing his research. Originally, he wanted to have Buckminster Fuller, wanted to do a little piece about Buckminster Fuller, but in 2008, he created a second film called Zeitgeist Addendum. The first part was about the fractional reserve system. The second part was about corporatocracy, and the third part was about Jacques Fresco and the Venus Project, and how capitalism perpetuates the conditions that it claims to address. And so, he's kind of evolving. And at that time, they proposed this Zeitgeist movement. And in 2009, that's when they had the first Z-Day. And that's when a lot of people here, I think it was probably 2009, 2010, when they started meeting here. And it was a group of people like this that got together to discuss these things. And then 2011, he made Moving Forward, which is about human nature, social pathology. The third part was on Project Earth, and the fourth part was on the Zeitgeist movement, and how we can organize ourselves. And again, it just started growing and growing and growing. But the main thing is trying to remind people of what a post-scarcity world could actually look like. Because so many people get caught up and they don't have any solutions. For myself, Zeitgeist Addendum was the first documentary I've ever seen that actually offered real life solutions. And I'm sure a lot of you were very impacted by the different films. But right now we're here, and we're trying to show people different models, different ways that we can do things. And it doesn't have to be any one way. It's not just us, it's you guys. Whatever you guys can come up with. We're a leaderless movement at this point. And we want to be able to adapt in whatever ways necessary. So tonight, we're going to be hearing, next after me, we're going to hear a talk by Anne on the peace economy. And then Vince is going to be talking about wage slavery. And then Sean is going to be talking about the transition and how we can move from where we're at right now to a better post-scarcity system. Just want to give a little introduction. Yes. Thank you.
All right, good. So we're going to take a small, quick break while we get our new laptop hooked up here. So you guys feel free to check out the Circular City, check out the T-shirts, some of our flyers we have, and grab some food. Okay?
Normally we
I do these presentations because it's more like a discussion. We usually sit in circles, but I do have a PowerPoint. I'm a communications consultant with the Peace Resource Center. It's right in City Heights, and we do a lot of work around alternatives to the present economy. So we're really looking, a big part of the Fight for 15, but really looking at that and realizing that bolstering the bottom salary is not the answer. It's really attacking the top salary earners. So I just wanted to throw that out as we talk. I love this flag. So Sean gave me this, and I took it on several of the rallies that happened when Trump came to town, and people just took pictures of it left, right, and center. It's so true, right? Let's see if I got this right. So this is similar. The slideshow I'm about to show you is similar to the slideshow I gave when I was asked to counter a military analyst who was promoting the military economy of San Diego. He said the military economy moves San Diego, it's too big to fail. And I said, but wait a minute. So this is kind of that slideshow. So we're going to talk about a peace economy. These are the values of a peace economy. Did we miss anything? So some of the things that we believe in are just schools. We've been talking a lot recently about what schooling would look like in an equitable society. And who controls the curriculum. So there are such things as child-led curriculums. So it's not the adult telling the child what's right and what's wrong. How many of you read the book, Lies My Teacher Taught Me? Yes. Awesome book. Yes. I was a classroom teacher, and I read that book, and I thought, oh my God, it's so true. And then nonviolent activism. So we do believe in nonviolence for a lot of different reasons. There's many different definitions of nonviolence, but if you commit violence, you perpetrate violence. And that's what we're trying to move away from. The other reason I believe in nonviolent activism is because the government's always going to have bigger guns than us, always. So I don't see the point of being violent. So what kind of economy do we need? So we talk a lot about the gross national product or the regional product. And there's this new kind of economy that's being discussed, especially at the UN. It came out of the Kingdom of Bhutan, and it's the Gross National Happiness Index. It's not looking at strict capital, strict profits. It's looking at a variety of quality of life indicators that's much more important than how much money you're making on Wall Street. And then the other thing that's missing a lot from a lot of the economy discussions we have is a cost-benefit analysis. So we actually have an economic triad called the military, industrial, prison triad. And this is the big kind of monolith that's come together to create the capitalistic system that we have today. It's like an uber capitalistic system. We have a capitalism on steroids today. So I'm actually part of the war resistors, and this is our slogan: we divest from war and we invest in people. And I'm so happy to come and talk to you, because one of the things that I do to defund the military is I'm a war tax resistor. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what that means, how to resist your war taxes. So these are the values of militarism. It is a system. We are talking about a huge system. One of the problems with the military is that it gets an open-ended check. Their research, they do tremendous amounts of research that has set science back 100 years, because their research is not allowed to be shared. If you sign a contract with the Department of Defense, you cannot share that research with anyone else. It becomes secret. And a lot of people who work in the research industry, their research that they do, especially in the social sciences, is not shared with the public. But the military has that. The military understands us better than we understand ourselves. oftentimes. And that's because of the tons of money that they've invested in social sciences, behavior, those kinds of researches. So, and to that point, the Society of Psychologists have actually put out a letter asking all psychologists to refrain from doing research for the military. That came out of a lot of the investigation in the torture that we were doing at Guantanamo Bay. So we have private prisons, detention centers, aggressive policing, border walls. That's part of the military system. I always like to say that the border wall is not about keeping people out, but about keeping us in. It creates a mindset of fear. And once they have us rooted in fear, it's easier to control us. So militarism values force over alternatives, and we see that a lot in our foreign policy. The other problem we have is that the military spends a ton of money on propaganda. They just spent $63 million on making the Vietnam War look pretty. So they have enormous resources. Now, the price of freedom. So the United States, as soon as we start talking about both the U.S. budget and also your tax dollars. So the United States has as its military budget, and this is its stated military budget, not its hidden military budget, but stated military budget, we are spending more than the 7 next, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, 7. The 7 next big spending countries, and we still top them all added up together. That's a heck of a lot of money that we are doing. And it's by design, it's not by happenstance. So the cost of militarizing our economy really comes down to us. We are spending 50%, if you look at this, 50% of your tax dollars goes directly to support war and destruction. And the outcome of that, which is like, veterans coming back and taking care of veterans, things like that. Can anyone give me a number? In actuality, how much of the U.S. budget is spent on war, death, and destruction?
48%.
That's the stated. This is the stated. This is what they gave us, yeah.
My guess is 53%.
That's still far from the real cost.
84%.
Oh, who said it? Getting close.
90?
Yeah, well, it's more like 75% of the dollars that we give to the federal government are spent on war, death, and destruction. And it's being ramped up even more now under the present administration. So I just wanted to put that out there. Because a lot of people don't realize that the State Department is actually engaged in warfare and death and destruction. The Commerce Department is also engaged in extortion, death, and destruction. The World Bank, which the Commerce Department supports, goes around and basically extorts countries to follow the capitalistic model or they get cut off. Venezuela, we had a coup against Venezuela. We had a coup against Iraq because they tried to nationalize their oil companies, their oil pits. So this is what it looks like in San Diego. Those are San Diego police. This was after the Trump rally in September 2016. They got bored at the Trump rally and they decided to invade Barrio Logan, which is a low-income Hispanic, mainly Hispanic neighborhood just to the south of us. Just go down Harbor Drive. Look at all that military armor. So this is what we're dealing with. The shooter at it's the Parkland School in Florida. So this is from the first quote is from his individualized educational plan at his school. Even back then, they realized he became preoccupied with things such as current events regarding wars and terrorism. He's fascinated by the use of guns and often speaks of weapons and the importance of having weapons to remain safe in this world. So he is swallowing the poison that the military is giving us. So police departments have received tens of thousands of machine guns. The San Diego Police Department actually got a whole box of machetes. I don't know why, but that was from the military. The school district got a tank, which there was community outpouring, and the school district said, oh, okay, maybe we shouldn't accept a tank from the military government. They were going to put the tank at Lincoln High School, which is a predominantly black neighborhood, and they were going to have the students paint it. That was their civic thing. So this here, cost benefit of a militarized economy is that your lawful right to protest is now under attack. This is in El Cajon, October 17, 2016. Alfred Olago had been shot by police a month earlier. The community came out in waves of protest, peaceful protest. On October 17th, the Sheriff's Department decided they had enough and they moved in mass. This is an armored tank. This was a military tank at Panchito's parking lot on Broadway in El Cajon because people were out there protesting peacefully. And so everyone was, you either were arrested or you left the scene. So this is the cost of a militarized economy, all the things that we talked about. These are kids being introduced to the idea that shooting is fun. The young man to the left on the bottom was a veteran and is now homeless. And then what was predicted when we attacked Iraq in 1990 was that homelessness would shoot up, human services would go down, and that's exactly what we're seeing in downtown San Diego. How many of you have been downtown San Diego at night? What do you see?
Homeless?
How many?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. We're seeing hundreds now. So we're seeing really, this is disaster capitalism. So as a matter of conscience, I will not voluntarily pay my hard-earned money to a government whose daily order of business is waging war. So I become a conscientious objector to my taxes. I am not allowing my taxes to be used, and I'm not buying it. So I withhold my taxes. So the Peace Resource Center, we're the local affiliate, and one of the things that we work on is defunding war, and one of the ways you defund it is not to pay your federal taxes, because more than half of your federal taxes go directly to support war and destruction. So, and I actually do a whole workshop on how to do that. I do several workshops. I've been doing that for a couple of years. I stopped paying my taxes. Well, I stopped paying a portion of my taxes back in 2012. Last year, I refused to pay any of my taxes. What I do is I redirect. So I send the IRS, I file my tax form, and I send the IRS a letter saying I've paid my taxes, but not to the federal government. Last year, I paid my taxes to People Over Profit San Diego, Peace Resource Center of San Diego, to the Tax March of San Diego, and also to KNSJ, which is a local progressive radio station. So I sent this letter to the IRS to tell them that, yes, I know I should pay my taxes. I love taxes. I think I should pay taxes. I'm not paying it for war and destruction. So what does a peace economy look like? This is what I want my taxes to go to. When our schools get all the money they need, and the Air Force has to hold the bake sale. So again, this is what a peace economy looks like, but we're going to get more into it. So the Gross National Happiness Index, what it looks at is psychological well-being of a people, health, education, time use, all these wonderful things, cultural diversity and resilience, good governance, community vitality, living standards, and above all, ecological diversity and resilience. So this is the map the UN created. Green means you're a happy country, red means that you're an unhappy country, using those indicators from before. So where does the US fall?
Last red.
Pretty bad.
Most of us are not happy.
What's up with the white? What's with the white? The African areas, the white?
Not enough data to even, yeah, because a lot of times it's hard to get the data. There's just so much destruction and just so much, there's very little resilience. And a lot of that has to do with European colonialism. So proposed peace economy for San Diego. What you need is is just like in the environment. You need decentralized loose networks. When you have something that's too big to fail, what happens? So the military economy in San Diego is 25% of our general economy. So if the military fails, what happens in San Diego? Yes, but what economy drops? So that's the gross national product. The gross national product, how many of you have ever read about what the gross national product actually measures? What is it measuring?
Stock market and services. Is it the total value of goods and services exchange across the national economy every year?
And does it measure general well-being of the people during that exchange of capital, that passage of capital? So we are the richest country in the world, and we are one of the unhappiest countries in the world. Resource-based sharing, this is where I love Zeitgeist. Resource sharing. So I'm also with Women Occupy. We've been looking at cooperatives, and we've also been looking at a time bank. People Over Profits has been examining using a time bank approach to sharing resources, to exchanging the things of value that we need. So if you're interested in that, let us know, because People Over Profits, they meet every Wednesday at Border X Brewery down Barrio Logan, and one of their goals is to create a time bank. Women Occupy San Diego, we tried a time bank. One of the problems we found out was that we tried a time bank that was online. Oftentimes you didn't see the person you were exchanging resources with. People need to see people. That's what we learned. If it's an online system where you don't know the other person, there's no trust, there's no sense of the quality of the other person. So that failed. Time bank really works best, we think, when you are intimately involved and you have person-to-person contact. Sustainable, productive rather than reductive. Gross national product is reductive. It's based on shock doctrine. The thing that jacks up Wall Street profits is destruction. Israel is one of the biggest examples of that. The more terror, the more attacks on Israel, the higher its GDP. The biggest service, the biggest economy in Israel is the security economy. And that's what they want to bring here to the United States. And that's where you're getting the 1% getting increasingly richer and richer at the expense of everyone else. And this is just very brief. There's so much to go into, but I only have 15 minutes. All right, so you need a diverse portfolio, just like the nature. Nature is diverse. You cannot put everything into a couple of buckets. You need to have it all scattered around. So you want the economic portfolio to be in so many different sectors that if one crashes, it doesn't cause catastrophic failure. You want interest-free. The Bible prohibits interest. It calls it usury, or usury. I can't say that word right. But there's a reason for it. The interest is based on the idea that you have unlimited growth. Is that true? How many Earths do we have? One. Right now, the average person who lives in the United States lives as if there are 4 Earths. That is unsustainable. So you need, again, interest-free. You need to exchange debt. That's what the dollar is. That's an exchange of debt. You are promising to value that dollar, but it should not come with interest attached to it. So your credit cards, your bank loans, all of those things. When you lend money to someone, when you put money in the bank and gather interest on it, what that is doing is it's taking money from those who can't afford it and moving it into the 1%. So interest-free debt exchange. Main Street over Wall Street, you have to have worker ownership and cooperatives. Small business support rather than corporate welfare. The biggest tax dollar giveaway is not to that welfare mom with the 6 kids. It is to Verizon. It's to Qualcomm. It's to y'all. He's preaching to the choir. So you need to support small businesses. One of the things that we talked about at People Over Profits got excited that if we do really dedicated war tax redirection, that if we take our taxes instead of giving it to the federal government, we can create small community banks that we control that can be a loan, a provider of loans to small businesses in the community. And I love that idea. We can create our own banks. And actually, California right now is working on legislation to create a California bank. It will be a public bank, not a private bank. Every bank right now in the U.S. is a private bank. Most of the banks in countries like Portugal, some of the smaller countries, Costa Rica, those are public banks. They're not owned by private corporations, they're owned by the people. And then this one is so important. Human beings, we migrate. That's just what we do. We evolved migrating. We will always migrate. And when you put up borders, you kill the heart of humanity. No border walls. That is what makes for a open, free, sustainable economy. So those are kind of the big... All right, so how do we move from a disaster capitalism to a peace economy? Rule number 1 at the Peace Resource Center is...
Communication?
Loving communication. Accepting other people. Not expecting other people to do what you want and then getting mad that they don't do what you want. Giving people space to be who they need to be. And then working with the people you can work with. So one of the other ways we do also is we have a peace tax return. We are working on having the federal government set up, instead of a Department of State and a Department of Defense, but a Department of Peace and a peace tax return. This is a form that we have on our website, and you can file this as a protest. So this is what we actually need. If we took all that money that we were spending on war and we spent it instead on providing resources, like that beautiful city that's sitting right there, wow, that's a dream. All right, and then this is just a Peace Resource Center. We're in Southeast San Diego. We do a lot of educational workshops. We do war tax resistance workshops. We do nonviolent campaign workshops. We work in schools teaching children how to work with one another. Okay, and these are some of our resources. So, thank you. Oh, Shock Doctrine. You got to read that book. How many of you have read it? What do you think?
That was an awesome book. I've read a lot of Naomi Klein's books already. Well, I listened to them on audiobook. I'm a very slow reader. But I have lots of time in a car.
Yes. So we're going to be doing, she actually was interviewed on Democracy Now! We'll be playing some of those in the Peace Resource Center. I'll let you know. You can always go to our website and see.
Is your, was it the tax alternative that for Tax for Peace, is that on there?
Yes, how you divest from war?
Yeah. I mean, you showed a couple clips of that. Is that one of the links on there?
Yes, that's going to be on our Peace Resource Center. So when you go to our Peace Resource Center website, you'll see there will be I'm looking for this.
That one.
Yeah, and then that will take you to the source. Also, you can go to the National War, and I have some of the flyers over there, the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee. They have a ton of resources. We're actually having our annual gathering in LA first weekend of May this year. So you're welcome to join us there as well.
Does TurboTax cover that?
No. But we are doing, funny enough, you should ask, we've had a lot of concerns of people about IRS. So I've been doing it for 5 years now. IRS is underfunded. People don't realize that. So you get these form letters. My first time doing war tax resistance, I was terrified. I sent my letter to IRS. And I just get a form letter back. And every year I get this form letter back. So NUTRIC, which is the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, actually provides a lot of resources to us. So we actually even have a fund to support people. We have people who've been doing war tax resistance for years, and if the IRS gets a hold of them, and we can talk about the different ways that you can stop that from happening, but if the IRS does finally get a hold of you and forces you to pay your penalties and fees, we actually have a fund that we've been paying into to help support those of us who need help paying back their fees. We're a huge support to one another. The one other thing that we are doing at the Peace Resource Center, we're working with the California Western School of Law. They're going to come in and do just a general IRS tax law workshop so that you can answer all your questions, like what happens if you default, what's the amnesty look like for the IRS, how you can up your charitable donations, those kinds of things. And so I'll let Sean know when we have that workshop set up so people can come and get very educated answers about the IRS. So thank you. Yeah.
Is it too late to do that with your taxes for this year?
No, what's not, have you sent your tax, if you have not sent your taxes in, so the first thing you want to do is you want to establish yourself as a conscientious objector. You don't want to establish yourself as one of those people who hates to pay taxes. So you don't want to be like, one of those tax dodgers. You're coming at this from a conscientious perspective. So whatever your reasons are, whatever your rationale is, this year you pay your taxes, if you were going to do it anyways, but you want to send in a letter. And you either send this form in, send in a handwritten letter saying, I am protesting the use of my tax dollars for the use of ongoing war and destruction. I am formally signing up as a conscientious objector to war, and I refuse in the future to let you use my tax dollars for war and destruction. So on the NUTRIC website, and there's a flyer over there with that, there's a lot of different letters that people have written over the years, and you can look at those for ideas. But you really want to establish yourself first with the IRS. And I don't send it just to the IRS. My first letter I sent to the president, I sent to all my elected officials because I wanted to make it public. Now there are people who do it off the grid, and if you want to do it off the grid, that's completely fine. So for instance, we have 1,400 people that we know that are publicly refusing to pay their taxes. There are many more that refuse to pay their taxes, and they do it in different ways. And they go what we call off the grid. They do it silently. And so the easiest way, the most legal way, is to up how much you give away in charitable donations. The other easy way for some of us is to live simply, so you're not accruing a lot of money. And then the third way is literally to go off the grid. We can talk about that. So for instance, I am a consultant. I no longer take work as an employee. So if you become an employee, there are ways to deal with that. So the workshop is very dedicated to all the different scenarios. So if you're an employee, if you're a gesture, if you're a consultant, like that.
Great.
Great. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and do a presentation. I'm going to show you guys a video right now. Matt's going to get it dialed in. So while he does that, I'm going to open up with a presentation. At the end, I'll show a video, and then we'll go on from there. So we all kind of know what the Zeitgeist movement's about, what it is. What I intend to talk about here before the video is the why. Why am I here? Why are we here? If you're here, then you might feel like me, an increasing sense of unease, maybe even frustration with how we've organized society. There are many different aspects of our society that gives me this feeling, but I like to focus on one aspect that hits a little closer to home for probably most of us in this room. And it deals with a term that sometimes makes people feel a little uncomfortable, and the term I'm talking about is slavery. I consider myself a slave. Not in the classical sense, obviously, but more, I mean, we know about the ancient Egyptians building the pyramids, feudalism, the American slavery. But the term that I'm starting to hear more and more to describe the modern slave is wage slave. The reason this term slave is used here as opposed to something more euphemistic like an employee or a wage worker is that it implies a lack of freedom. So, although technically we have freedom to choose to work or not, most Americans are broke or even worse in debt, living paycheck to paycheck and aren't free to walk away from their job without losing their home or risking their own health without insurance. The foundation of wage slave, I've discovered, is a relationship from the wage slave to the master, in the sense that the wage slave is economically dependent on the master for its well-being. I got to learn this pretty quickly coming out of college. Already a little bit in debt from student loans, but I was ready to work my butt off. And I did, but it seemed that no matter how hard I worked, it just wasn't enough. There was always more work to be done, and I was already seeing how I was nothing more than just a tool or a machine for management to push to the limit in order to maximize my output. And this is true in every job I've had since. Of course, the largest portion of my profits from my job would go right up to the VPs and the shareholders of the company. My boss, my first boss, even once told me that the job of the employer is to get the most work out of the employee for the lowest wage possible. Yeah, I couldn't believe he told me that, and and as much as I disagreed with that philosophy, I knew he was kind of right. I mean, this is the fundamental idea of the free market economics. So basically, in this economy, I am the seller and I am the product. Now, the crushing part here is that I thought about it more, and I realized that I am economically dependent on my employer to give me the money in return for my labor, and I take that money and try to live my best off of it. Now, what that means is that when you or I purchase something, we're not paying with money. We're paying with the time from our lives that we use to earn that money. And it seems like we're having to give more and more of it. But there is a bright side to this. After a couple of years of work in my first job, I decided I didn't want to be a part of it anymore, and I quit. I didn't have another job. I just sold all my possessions, and I traveled to Europe for a year. Best time of my life. And I totally changed my perspective on the world. And ironically, when I was down there, it was one night, I was down in a basement pub in Rome, sharing a pint with the owner. And he turned to me and he asked me, "Have you ever seen the Zeitgeist documentaries?" And I was, no, I've never heard of it. Zeitgeist is German, maybe some kind of European movie or whatever. But he told me, go watch it. And I did. When I got back home to the States, they just came out with the third documentary. So I ran through all three of them. I couldn't get enough. And it really, because it connected the dots for me. The things that I kind of had a feeling for in the past, but I just couldn't make sense of it. Peter Joseph, really well, did a great documentary, explained it. And one of these dots dealt with wage slavery and its relationship to the economy. And this is one of the things I learned from the videos is that just as the wage slave is dependent on the master for money, the economic system is dependent on the wage slave to sustain it. But that's the problem. It's not sustainable. The growing inequality and social unrest aside, there's also an issue that we have, a big one, and that is automation. Computer and machine capabilities are growing at increasing rates. It's getting to the point now where we can potentially replace a huge portion of the workforce. Now, this could be viewed as a bad thing or good. Either this is a threat to us wage slaves and our livelihood, or this is an opportunity to free humanity from the system that exploits our labor. In our current economy, automation is a threat. In a resource-based economy, automation frees us. And hopefully we got set in here, and I'll show you guys a video to tell you more about how it will free us. No dice? Keep talking. Okay.
How do they do it in the... That's a signal for stretching.
Yeah. So how's everybody doing tonight? So, okay, well, it's basically a video just explains how automation is really taking over just with cars, computers, and it's just really threatening a lot of our jobs, and we're really going to have a tough time dealing with it unless we change. Basically, we evolve the way the technology has. So without the video, I'll just skip right to the end here. There was a quote that I just saw recently from the late, great Stephen Hawking, right after he passed. I think he would have been a fan of a resource-based economy if he heard about it. He's quoted saying on Reddit, "If machines produce everything we need, the outcome will depend on how things are distributed. Everyone can enjoy a life of luxurious leisure if the machine-produced wealth is shared. Or most people can end up miserably poor if the machine owners successfully lobby against wealth distribution." So far, the trend seems to be towards the second option, with technology driving ever-increasing inequality. And he's spot on there. I totally believe it. He was right. We seem to be leaning towards the second option. And this is exactly why I'm here. That's it. Great, so now you see, you can stop that. You get the point about how automation is coming for us, whether we like it or not, and there's nothing that the current market-based economy will offer as a resolution. I think people have been talking about the basic income. That might be something that can kind of help us out, but in the end, it's just kind of drawing out what we really need to do is actually have a real solid change with our system. So next, we're going to have Sean give a quick presentation here. You want to?
Good evening. So I thought I'd go ahead and backtrack a little bit here and just tell you a little bit about what the Zeitgeist movement is. Basically, it's a sustainability advocacy organization which conducts community-based activism and awareness through a network of global regional chapters, project teams, annual events, media, and charity work. The Zeitgeist movement's principal focus includes the recognition that the majority of the social problems which plague the human species at this time are not the sole result of some institutional corruption, scarcity, political policy, a flaw of human nature, or other commonly held assumptions of causality in the activist community. Rather, the movement recognizes that such issues as poverty, corruption, collapse, homelessness, war, starvation, and the like appear to be symptoms born out of an outdated social structure. While intermediate reform steps and temporal community support of interest to the movement, the defining goal here is the installation of a new socioeconomic model based on technically responsible resource management, allocation, and distribution, which would be considered the scientific method of reasoning problems and finding optimized solutions. The resource-based economic model is about taking a direct technical approach to social management as opposed to a monetary one or even a political one. It's about updating the workings of society to the most advanced and proven methods science has to offer, leaving behind the damaging consequences and limiting inhibitions which are generated by our current system of monetary exchange, profits, corporations, and other structural motivational components. So I thought I'd just go ahead and begin by starting right here. From scarcity to abundance, transitioning from a market-based economy into a resource-based economy. So right here we have a market economy, which is or what could be described along the lines of consumption, obsolescence, property, infinite growth, competition, labor for income, scarcity, and imbalance. Consumption is sort of like the underpinning of the economy. Repeat consumer purchase. It's what keeps capital moving. Obsolescence, that plays hand in hand with consumption insofar as obsolescence encourages repeat consumer purchase. And there's a term, planned obsolescence, which is actually a design flaw that's put into certain things such as a light bulb, where it's designed to break at certain intervals, also certain electronic equipment, and other such things. The notion of property goes back to the Neolithic Revolution when people began to store and warehouse grain. Over time, it became codified into law and enforced through mechanisms of violence. There's a lot of I could go into a very lengthy explanation about that. However, just in the interest of time, I'll go ahead and move it along. Infinite growth, we touched on that earlier, which is the underpinning assumption that we can continue to consume, purchase, and there are no limits to what we can do. When in fact the reality is we live on a finite planet with finite resources. Competition. This is sort of a cultural narrative, that goes back to growing up, as we went through the school system, taught that hey, if we work hard and we are the best amongst our peers, that we will somehow be rewarded. Labor for income. This is, I think that's fairly self-explanatory. Scarcity and imbalance. Okay, so what gives products, quote-unquote, value, a price, is scarcity, or the idea of scarcity. The earth economy, as it's labeled here, is synonymous with the resource-based economy, which is what we've been discussing. That stands in contrast to consumption, where we have preservation. Preservation is a value that resources are finite, and as such, we treat them, and we attempt to maximize the use. Optimum design. Things are, designed for repeat consumer purchase, and a resource-based economy things are designed to last. Access. Access is important because it allows people, everybody's needs to be met. Steady state as opposed to infinite growth. Collaboration. Collaboration as opposed to competition. Optimized mechanization. We touched on a little bit of that during the video. And then we also have abundance and equality. So, moving along. It is often helpful to determine where one stands in order to consider where one wants to go. For example, the refusal of Congress to pass single-payer health care insurance, despite overwhelming support, is genocidal to the poor, the young, and the elderly. Chronic disease is skyrocketing due to rising economic stress, unaffordable health care, and the excessive consumption of processed foods, particularly among the growing number of underprivileged in our society. The pharmaceutical industry makes a killing, no pun intended, off the misuse, overuse, and abuse of prescription medication. Life expectancy is less than many other industrialized nations and falling. Tax policies favor the corporate elites and the wealthy ownership class. Think about the most recent tax legislation under the Trump administration, where they moved the benchmark from 35% down to 21%. So, who pays the difference in terms of the reduction of social services and public health care programs? Wall Street creates and destroys businesses for the sake of profits, regardless of the impact on individuals, families, and societies. The elimination of the gold standard in favor of a bank-controlled fiat currency has led to half a century of inflation, further burdening those on fixed incomes. The lack of decent jobs leads to those who might otherwise turn to other forms of criminal pastimes, such as cybercrime, drug dealing, and the like. Alas, the criminal justice system punishes those hardest who cannot afford to pay to play in this system. The war on terror, or perhaps the war of terror, was an excuse for the U.S. military to engage in multiple wars of conquest. The glorified position of the military and its immunity from political control propagate the false narrative that force and violence are legitimate ways to solve problems. Video games supported by the military and corporate interests teach young people that killing is fun, and consequently, we act shocked and appalled during yet another mass school shooting. I could go on, however, in the interest of time and not to divert from the main focus here, I leave this. Can the United States survive as a nation for another generation? It seems doubtful without a movement dedicated to correcting the above mentioned. Positive change does happen, paradoxically, if people are willing to work for it. So, we're going to move along. This is a closer examination of 5 structural changes to reduce socioeconomic inequality and the resulting spectrum of social disorder and oppression that is inherent to the market economy. Okay, the first thing, we touched on this during the video, so I'm not going to go into great detail other than to say that automation could be defined as the transition from labor for income emphasis to machine automation emphasis. Goals: maximize productive capacity, reduce human exposure, and increase efficiency. Access: the transition from property ownership emphasis to strategic access emphasis. Maximize good use of time efficiency, reduce production pressure, increase overall good availability of reuse. Open source is the transition from proprietary research, data hoarding, and internal development to collaborative commons contribution. Goal is maximize innovation. Last, we have localization is the transition from globalization to localization, emphasizing network design. Goals is to maximize productive or the distributed efficiency and reduce waste. And the network digital feedback is a transition from fragmented economic data relay to fully integrated sensor-based digital systems. Goals are to maximize feedback and inform efficiency utilization, increase total efficiency. So, access. It could be defined as the ability by your permission to approach, enter, speak with, or use admittance. In this case, they have access to the files. I pause to reflect on this statement because I think it's very profound. Poverty is the worst form of violence. Mahatma Gandhi. So, structural violence, and I think this is important to touch on here, and I'll do so briefly, is a term commonly ascribed to Johann Galton, which he introduced the article Violence, Peace, and Peace Research in 1969. It refers to a form of violence wherein some societal structures or social institution may harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. Institutionalized adultism, ageism, classism, elitism, ethnocentrism, nationalism, racism, and sexism are some examples of structural violence as proposed by Galton. According to Galton, rather than conveying a physical image, structural violence is an unavoidable impairment or because structural violence affects people differently in various social structures, it is to be held very closely linked to social injustice. So there's a couple thoughts on that, and I just thought go ahead and put this up here about what it is. It's depersonalized. There are no clear perpetrators. Our system represents certain institutions that perpetuate structural violence. Move to the next slide. Definition is the action built into structures of society which show up as unequal power and unequal life chances. The unequal distribution of resources and unequal distribution of power to decide over distribution of resources. So for example, everybody's born into different circumstances. And often those circumstances largely determine people's outcomes. And when I say outcomes, I mean, where people fall within the socioeconomic spectrum. Cultural violence refers to aspects of the symbolic sphere, the culture of our society that is used to justify or legitimize direct or structural violence. Okay, so in this slide here, it's kind of a thought. So for example, during colonial times, with slavery and the war on drugs, originally proposed by Nixon back in the early 1970s. I mean, if you think about it, consider the origins of early policing with the Pinkertons that broke up unions in the North. That was originally proposed to help maintain power and privilege and to break up groups of people trying to organize and assemble for their rights. We also, in the South as well, the folks that gathered up people who were crossing north of the Mason-Dixon line. And of course, out here in California, with the armed militias that rounded up and interned Native Americans. So it begs the obvious question, is this just a matter of semantics? And how many degrees of separation really exist between the two? In this case, the plantation overseer and the police officer. The faces of cultural or structural violence that we see every day. So last year we had in fact I believe it's still going on, there's a hepatitis A outbreak. And I don't have the specific numbers of people that died. I believe it was somewhere around 500. Does that sound correct?
The flu has a lot. I don't know how many died from hepatitis.
Quite a few. Here we point ourselves as being America's finest city, but in reality, how do we treat those who are most disadvantaged? So for example, in El Cajon, they recently passed a law forbidding people from assisting the homeless under the pretense that they are trying to protect those from a hepatitis A outbreak. That, I think, in itself is an example of structural violence, laws being used to marginalize certain groups of people. I couldn't help myself. I don't have, a great amount of rapport for this individual because we were both fellow gang members at one time. General John Kelly was actually the, I believe, I forget, but he was actually in service during when I was in. A smiling dog in a suit is still a dog. Here we were talking about ICE deportation, certain groups of individuals, being rounded up and being passed across an arbitrary border. Once again, these structures exist to marginalize certain groups of people and disenfranchise others. Cultural violence, a legacy institutionalized. So with cultural violence, it refers to aspects of culture that could be used to justify or legitimize direct or social structural violence and may be exemplified by religion, ideology, language, and art, empirical science, and formal science. Cultural violence makes direct and structural violence look and feel right, or at least not wrong, according to Galton. The study of cultural violence highlights the ways in which direct violence and the fact of structural violence are made legitimized and thus made acceptable in society. One mechanism of cultural violence is to change the moral color of an act from red wrong to green right, or at least yellow acceptable. So, I'm sure you remember this prior to the invasion and subsequent occupation of Iraq in March of 2003. Prior to that, I believe it was October of 2002, Colin Powell went before the United Nations with this vial of anthrax, trying to use this as the pretext for the invasion of Iraq. Well, consequently, and consequently, okay, maybe he's telling me to wrap this up, right?
Saying I want to
It is truly disturbing. So we'll move along here. But at that time, I'm sure you remember, not too long after 9/11, how we were basically trying to create this air of superiority. We were trying to out-group those other individuals halfway around the world, darker complected, speak a different language, have different customs. And we were using that as the pretext to go in and to, expand our global empire and basically depose of Saddam Hussein, who had decided prior to that to divest himself from the dollar, from the petrodollar, and wanted to begin trading his oil in euros. Interesting. Okay, cultural violence, a legacy that lives on in American culture. I touched on earlier about how, we have a lot of mass shootings here in schools. Well, think about the symbols that we adore ourselves with, our art, our culture, our video games, our media here. And the American sniper, the good guys, invade a country, call the native savages, and use superior technology to kill them. Sound familiar? I guess it goes to show that the more things change, the more they stay the same, unfortunately. Access versus ownership. Permaculture versus corporate culture. is actually quite fascinating because what it does is it talks about a feedback loop between, in a perfect, let me give you an example of like a permaculture farm. There's a place called Bronze Aquaponics. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of this up in the North County. But what he does is he grows moringa, which he feeds to his fish, which in turn, he takes the fish excrement and, feeds the moringa. So it creates like this feedback loop. And anyway, so I contrast that with corporate culture, where, things are regimented, there's rigid hierarchies, there's rules, anyway, so moving along. I'm sorry, I feel a little bit distracted here, but I'll move along here. So according to the late George Carlin, the reason they call it the American dream is, quite frankly, you have to be asleep to believe this shit. Just imagine, if you will, if the majority of our lives weren't devoted to chasing green pieces of paper with dead slave owners' faces printed on it. Just imagine if we weren't trapped in the illusion of trying to buy things that we couldn't afford to impress people who frankly don't even care. How much more value can we create with the time used to foster meaningful interpersonal relationships? Just maybe it's time to stop doing business as usual and begin to live our lives as though they weren't special and not to be bought and sold and traded as timeshares. This I encourage you to consider. Every revolution begins with a single act of defiance. Maybe it's time to stop going along with our society is full of useful tools and faithful fools. Disobey, think instead. Moving along. Automation. We touched on that. And it's actually quite fascinating because has anybody ever heard of Moore's Law? Where it talks, Don, could you share with us real quick about Moore's Law?
Well, it basically states that computing power will essentially double about every 18 months. It was first proposed by the guy's name. Well, his last name is obviously Moore, but he was the former CEO of Intel Corporation.
Right.
And if you think about how long it takes to replace your current smartphone when the next model comes out, that's about right, 18 months.
Yeah, that's about correct. So, as we saw from the video earlier, automation is becoming, the new normal. And jobs are eventually going to phase out. And, there's a plus side to this. If for no other reason, this system may simply evolve past itself. And this is actually quite encouraging. So, post-wage slavery and exploitation in the RV paradigm shift is the technique, method, or system of operating or controlling a process by the highly automated means as by electronic devices, reducing human intervention to a minimum. Okay, so the question, are you obsolete? I think we touched on this a little bit earlier. Has anybody gotten like these strange robocalls, from a telemarketer? Every damn thing. Yeah. Well, so it's happening right now. It starts off with this chirpy, high-pitched voice that, tries to lead you in, and then all of a sudden says, press. Okay, the loan officer. Well, basically they can calculate within a questionnaire and either approve you or deny you using an algorithm, a cashier. So has anybody ever gone through the checkout lines like over at Bonds or wherever and have automatic stations? Right. So pretty soon, I think I can't even project, but it's happening. As much as we may try to resist or encourage it. Paralegals, they touched on it earlier in the video about discovery and fast food code, so I just threw the symbol that. Open source, this is excellent. So open source is collaboration, going back to our values that we discussed earlier. And open source, has many different examples, and it's also disrupting industries all along across the way. So post-proprietary ownership in the RV paradigm shift. we're looking at computers pertaining to or denoting software whose source code is available free of charge to the public to use, copy, modify, sublicense, or distribute. Okay, some great examples like Wikipedia, completely, did away with certain industries such as Encyclopedia Britannica and the World Book Encyclopedia. It's something that people can actually go on there and make additions and, put citations and footnotes. And then I'll go ahead and also touch on open source ecology, which I find to be very encouraging. So, open source ecology is a network of farmers, engineers, architects, and supporters whose main goal is the eventual manufacturing of the global village construction set. As described by the open source ecology, the GVCS is an open technological platform that allows for the easy fabrication of 50 different industrial machines that take to build a small civilization with modern comforts. So there's actually a really fascinating video. It's a TED Talk on this, and you just go ahead and move forward to that. It is Global Village Construction Set. So you can just look on YouTube if you want to get a little bit more information on that. But so additive manufacturing or 3D printing. Actually, just to kind of make this concept real to you, I went ahead and 3D printed a couple things that I thought I'd go ahead and pass out, so you might like to take a look at and consider. First of all is our TZM symbol up at the front here. I went to the public library with an STL file, and I put it in, and I was able to get that printed out. It actually took about 6 hours to do, but for the presentation, I thought it might sort of add a certain dimension to it, and actually kind of bring these concepts to life. The other thing I'm going to go ahead and pass out to you here is a phone case that I printed. I'm going to go ahead and pass out. It's a little brittle, but you have to understand it's a work in progress. So I'll go ahead and pass that on over. There you go. But this technology is real, and it is here, and it's taking on many different forms. As you can see here, the house. There's 3D printed homes. This one right here, I believe, was constructed in Beijing. I don't have additional.
We may have needed that.
That's all right, just skip it.
All right, here we go. Let's see here. Where do we go with that? He's trying to get my attention. Now he's like pulling the plug on me, saying, "Dad, it's time to go." Oh my goodness. All right. One moment.
Is that thing just clicking again, maybe?
I don't know.
Don't worry about it, just deliver.
Okay, there you go. So yeah, excellent. So another outstanding example here is the massive online open course. I highly recommend these. In fact, I recently took a 3D printing course through Coursera right here. They have many different topics, and you can actually earn certificates. If that's your if that's your what you're interested in doing. But for general topics, and you can often refer to these resources. Localization. So localization is to make, local, fix, or assign to, or restrict to a particular place or locality. This is the opposite of globalization. And this goes along the lines of the values that we discussed earlier about preservation and so, does anybody know what Earth Overshoot Day is? Has anybody heard of that?
When we use up the resources that we should in a year, we use up before that year is up.
Right. Does anybody know what the Earth Overshoot Day is for here, 2018? This year? No? Right. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine. And actually, that'd be pretty sad if it actually came before Earth Day. But basically, what's happening is it is rolling back each year, and part of the reason behind that is because we continue to consume and consume and consume, based on the premise of infinite growth, within our economy. So there's a lot of negative externalities, and that's something that's not discussed often, externalities, and what those are things that are not calculated in GDP. And one of them is, like, for example, pollution that causes negative, so for example, bad health outcomes, disease, and other forms of sickness. Population growth. This is, in some ways, we're beginning to have conflict. I kind of briefly touched on earlier about, what, oil wars were all about. Well, imagine what water wars are going to look like. Think about that. For example, like you have Egypt, which is completely dependent upon the Nile River, and its neighbor Ethiopia, which is building hydroelectric dams upstream. So these are potential flashpoints. Turkey is another example, where the Tigris and the Euphrates, I believe, go through Syria and in through Iraq. Building those structures upstream could potentially create conflicts downstream as, access to water is restricted to farmers that, create along the banks. And I added that slide right there to just kind of give you, a conceptual view of what it looks, what that looks like. Food miles. I know we've talked about this before, like the average amount of miles it takes for your food to reach your plate. And within the prism of market logic, you take, for example, blueberries that are grown in Chile. They're flown here, and it's actually cheaper to fly the blueberries in, because the labor, the land, the water, and all of that, as opposed to doing it here locally, where we have an environment, in the valley that, is perfect for growing, all sorts of fruits and vegetables. But because it's cheaper, we do that. But yet, we expend more resources. That's sort of like the contradiction within, our market system. So what we're talking about with localization is, transcending kind of like the limitations of that thinking, and starting to begin to do things locally. And I think Ann might have touched on earlier that she belongs to a project that does local farmers co-ops. If you're interested in maybe learning a little bit more about that later, please touch base with Ann. Moving along, digital feedback. So, I thought this might just kind of clarify the term here. Displaying a readout in numerical digits rather than by a pointer or hands on a dial, a digital speedometer, a digital watch. Feedback is the process of returning the output of a circular system or digital to the input, either to oppose the input or to aid the input, positive feedback. So just how soon is right now. I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to you. Has anybody ever heard of blockchain? Does anybody know a little bit about blockchain technology?
Yeah, I think we all heard about it just because of Bitcoin, really. But I did hear something, I think, like on NPR, they talked about blockchain can be applied to many other things like voting. So you can't hack the vote. I can't remember what other uses it were. Yeah, it's basically the idea of a decentralized way of carrying or keeping information transactions.
Right. So blockchain that's correct. Don, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, it did it pretty good, actually better than I did.
Yes, it's actually quite fascinating. It's a continuously growing list of records called blocks that are linked and secured using cryptography. I think that's the technical definition. And then it goes on, and rather than kind of bore you with the details, I think I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to a discussion later on. And just to summarize, these are some of the, I know this is kind of hard to read here, but I thought I'd go ahead and put some recommended resources here. The Zeitgeist movement, the Venus Project, the Free World Charter, the Ubuntu Party. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the Ubuntu movement. It's the, I believe, the sharing economy, as they call it. And then I actually had some recommended reading. Now it's not there. And then I thought I'd go ahead and kick it back. So the question remains, do we have the capacity to be honest with ourselves? More importantly, do we have the willingness to follow our moral convictions? I do believe that, in fact, we can do better than this. Thank you.
All right, so thanks, Sean. Thanks, Ann, the other presenters. That's pretty much the end of our presentation part. So we're going to just open it up for a little Q&A if you guys have any questions. You can check out the Circular City, help yourself with some drinks and food, and we'll unlock the door so you can leave whenever you want. So, any questions, comments? I had a teacher in 8th grade that used to say, questions, comments, bomb threats. And now in this day, I realize you can't say that anymore. It's amazing how we've evolved now.
What was the last word?
Bomb threats? He would say question. And he was training to be a priest. He was a brother. I was in a Catholic school for a while, so that pretty much cured me from...
Snide remarks.
Yeah, he was kind of a smart ass. But yeah, so anybody have any questions, anything you can direct towards me, or... Yes?
So I guess I'm struggling with this. We have the automation, which could be a good thing or a bad thing. And so the way I'm seeing it is, as long as, so there has to be some human labor input to create the automation.
Correct.
But then there is this equal distribution of resources among people and nature to make sure that the system stays regenerating.
Right.
So you don't really need, you're looking at like a jobless system, more or less, where people...
In a way.
Yeah.
It's, really, that's why I chose the word wage slavery. It's jobs we don't have to do. And I've heard different numbers as far as, like, if you, in a system like this, there would have to be some work to be done still. It wouldn't be as much if we really harnessed, technology. But I heard somewhere, I can't remember where, that the amount of hours that was calculated that we actually volunteer for is more than would be needed for. So we're already giving away work for free, in a sense. And this would be, I would think people would be more inclined because it would be for, they would benefit from it. Everybody would benefit from it. But that's just my ideas, if anybody want to add to that.
The job movement.
Yes, sir.
Just following that line of thinking, wouldn't one of the steps in transition toward a more sustainable economy with reduction in hours of work because of automation be to sort of have a shorter work week for everybody? Instead of a 40-hour week, maybe a 15 to 20-hour week would make more sense.
Yeah, there could
with a higher wage per hour so that people would still be sustained in the economy.
Right, yeah.
That was actually proposed by Buckminster Fuller back in the 60s.
It's coming too, like some people propose that, a shorter work week along with basic income. It's like citizens dividend basically. Because technology was humans, therefore the humans need to survive. So it's coming, it's just a matter of like how fast will humans evolve. And then back to what you said about jobs. The jobs would still be around, but instead of working like behind register, it would be more communal, local. So let's say there's a community that works on the solar panels for the neighborhoods, or there's people that volunteer their time because they know that the society is better than what we have now. There will still be thousands or millions of jobs. It would just be a different type of job, more geared towards benefiting people.
I mean, I am a little terrified when we talk about the industrialization of our food system, because we've already had that happen. And so you have the industrialization and the unfair distribution of food. But the industrialization also came with its own blowback, which was we had to create food that could handle the large tractors better. And those foods that we created, we bred them. They're not GMO. We didn't use genetic engineering. We just bred them. Like the Davis tomato, we bred them to be stronger to handle the stress of the machines that harvest them. But then we lost flavor and nutrients. So I think, I'm all for technology, but I also want to make sure that we're not looking at technology that creates a system that is anti-human.
Has a negative effect.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, just to add to that point, like an interesting solution to me would be, what if you had like a industrialized garden in your backyard?
Right.
What if it was, a tomato that was grown by a robot that you went out and picked when you wanted it?
Well, I could grow my own tomato. That's awesome. I don't need it.
That's true. I mean, you can spend your time however you want, but there's other solutions.
I see it also going.
What you're saying is a smaller industrial. You're saying like a backyard industry as opposed to the...
Yeah, it doesn't always have to be
Talking about
centralized.
distributed.
Yeah, it could be.
We don't have to have farms way out in the boondocks. We can build a vertical hydroponic farm.
No, he's talking about his backyard, and that's what I'm...
Well, there's a
backyard. If you want it in your backyard.
There's a big urban farming movement too.
No, I know.
Yeah, it could be like a neighborhood center.
Whoa. We're good. He is talking about industrialized farming in our backyards, so you're using technology in our backyards, is what you're saying, I think.
Well, I'm imagining more of like the hydroponic towers. Have you seen those?
Yeah, well...
I'm not imagining like a tractor in the backyard.
Well, I wasn't thinking tractor, I was thinking aquaponics.
Like-
It's something that we would control.
Yeah, we do have that. Zeitgeist Indian has the vertical tower that we have kale, we have romaine lettuce.
Oh, awesome, where's that?
It's the Golden Hill.
You did not tell me that.
But that's like more local distribution is what we're trying to do. We're not trying to have like what Don said, like the one tower that just feeds everybody. Because we want it to be local in case of the problems that occur. We want the neighborhood to be more of a community. So you would have things like that, and basically every block would have their own food.
Food system.
Yeah.
I know, he's there.
And to go back to your point that you brought about the work week, there's a really interesting article called The Real Reason Behind the 40-Hour Work Week, and it's worth looking up. I think it's on Films for Action on their website, but basically described this guy who went away, just kind of like I did. He just took off for a while and traveled around, and he noticed that the real reason behind the 40-hour work week, even though studies have shown that we only work like maybe 3 hours, or really productive 3 hours of that 8-hour day, that part of it is to keep us inside this, building for a long time. So the free time that we have is really limited to, the nights and weekends, right? And that really kind of creates a mentality with us to where now when we have that free time, we don't really want to waste it. It's really, really valuable. So we end up spending it on real quick, instant gratification things. We spend a lot of money. Watch a lot of TV, watch sports, football, things like that. And it's really to keep us from, actually having more free time to do things that we really want to do. Things that are free, like walking, taking a hike, drive somewhere in the mountains. That takes a lot of time. And if our time is really valuable, we're not going to do things like that.
Or thinking of a world outside the given structure.
Yeah, or think about a group like the Zeitgeist group and spending our free time here as opposed to, going out and doing other things that, are not really contributing a lot to society.
Along those lines, we've had some developments in the recent generations, not only here, but other places in the world. As a particular industry leads to greater unemployment in that area, that you supplement the income of people.
The UBI.
In Germany, they have something like that, which enables people to receive money even though they're not working full-time. The closest thing we've come to it was in the auto industry. They bargained for a guaranteed annual wage. They didn't get that. They got what was called supplementary unemployment income, which was about 2/3 of the wage. But it took a real development. They had a lot stronger union in those days in order to accomplish something like that. We have to get into a position where workers start to demand some changes like this on a scale that would really happen.
Yeah, that's really one of the main points I think Chris touched on at the beginning when he did his introduction was it's a transition of a train of thought. We're going to have to start thinking differently, and we're going to have to make this slow transition, maybe fast. I don't know, everybody differs on their opinion about if we should just cut right to a resource-based economy or if we should make a change or wait for the economy itself to collapse and then offer up the resource-based economy to be a little more cynical. But yeah, I know everybody has their own theory about how we want to transition, but I think really the core of it is just a transition of a train of thought, and things like what you mentioned, we really need to figure out how we're going to get to.
I think with the type of thinking that's gone into the Zeitgeist and some of the movements like that, we don't have to wait for some catastrophe to happen for us to take some action.
There is
more incremental way.
There is some studies that are doing that. They're having guess there's a couple here in the United States, but I know there's mostly like in Norway and stuff where they have supplemental income or a single payer type system that they're using and they're trying to develop, and they're just studying to see what it's too new to know what's going to happen, but that's kind of outside. I know it's a little different than what we are talking about, but really what we're talking about, it seems to be quite extreme to just the regular person. You know what I mean? You come out with these ideas and
goes along with some of the same type of thinking of the ownership of some of the industries and so forth. In some other countries, they've got much more cooperative developments, like in Spain, the underground movement. There's some of that in parts of the United States. We have one co-op in San Diego out in Ocean Beach. I think we need to develop things like that where people are taking more action in relation to where they work. We do right here in San Diego.
Yeah, I've gotten that question a couple times from people. I'll go out on weekends to like Balboa Park and pass out flyers for Zeitgeist and promote it. A lot of people will ask me like, is there already a place that's starting to do this? And I didn't really have an answer. I don't know, maybe if somebody here has ever heard of any kind of a city that's kind of replicating something like this?
Well, they have the transition cities.
Transition cities?
Yeah, so the transition cities is not as progressive as this idea, but it is the idea of moving more into a peace economy. And so sustainable, small scale, and they're called transition cities. So San Diego doesn't have one yet, but there are groups, there are a lot of cities.
Specifically? Do you know like where?
Yeah, we're like Northern California. But if you just Google transition cities, and you'll find it.
Well, there was, I don't think it's quite like a transition city that you're talking about, where there's that one in Oregon where it was like an Indian kind of meditational kind of getaway, but then all of a sudden something happened. It got backlash, it turned cultist, and then it only did because of the backlash of the other town near it. They got guns and they got the wrong idea of what they're doing, and they were bombing the place. And so then they got guns themselves to defend themselves, and it just imploded. It just got over.
And if you're interested in watching that, it's called Wild Wild Country on Netflix. Yeah, it's like a 6-part series. I just finished watching it. It blew me away. But yeah, the way people came together, just as a side note, the way that people kind of came together in this collective group of people really excited me because of, kind of the vision that I've had for Zeitgeist after seeing all the films. But, they had, structural engineers, city planners, and, all these people of different specialized skills all coming together, and they literally built a city from scratch. And it was complete with their own electricity grid, plumbing, the works. So, yeah, it's very exciting to have been able to see that. So yeah, it's called Wild Wild Country on Netflix.
And that's
that aspect of it. Yeah, that's that place in Oregon.
And it kind of imploded though because of the outside forces that kind of manipulated the opposite of what they were trying to be. They were peaceful, but they turned them into a more like kind of a cult, and actually they became it. They became what the outside kind of dictated on them. It was kind of crazy. I mean, I didn't just watch the movie, but I know someone who was actually in it.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, it's a girl I grew up with, Saskia.
There have been smaller scale developments in San Diego. Some years back, there was a real crisis in relation to the children dying in the middle of the night in car crashes like in Tijuana, and having to fly the children up to Children's Hospital or UCSD at the golden hour. So it gave a lot of motivation to build a children's hospital in Tijuana. They had one wing of one hospital. And I participated in the groundbreaking work. There were architects, lawyers, certainly doctors and nurses were there ready, but they didn't have the physical facility. And a lot of us came together on this. It was a voluntary grouping, a nonprofit type of grouping, but the money wasn't there yet. So they began it with an emergency and training facility. And it took about $14 million to build the whole structure over years. Now much more has been completed, but it was a voluntary effort on the part of a lot of these professions. And I helped to tote up how much their contributions were. It's over $250 million. And the governor of Baja California gave them the land because there was so much volume of effort involved. And they had the doctors and nurses, which immediately staffed the facility that was built to start with.
And they were voluntary?
It's the type of thing where a lot of people have to come together to want to do something on a scale that's meaningful. We don't do that much here, and there are some parts of the world they do this more easily. We've got to get over the system that we have now, the top-down type of thing.
I think it is hard for us, especially here in the U.S., just because of the way the economy is and how we're forced to work so much, and all of our time and attention is going to that, but we don't have the time to do things like you mentioned, which makes it kind of tough. When was that they did this?
Well, this is 15 years ago. Now the facility is servicing children on the other side of the border, which is satisfactory.
That's pretty cool. I think that's something that I always look to see, because a lot of times I hear people with this critique of the resource-based economy and say, well, why would anybody want to work, or why would anybody want to contribute if everything is just given to them? And I always look to examples like this where people are doing it for the better good. They're not really getting anything out of it.
It shows the mindset of the city. It caused me to stop dealing with the Union Tribune. We had a big press conference, so forth, down by the border, and Children's Hospital was re-equipping 2 ambulances, pediatrically equipping them and giving them to this hospital. And Univision was there, a lot of the other groups, but the Union Tribune had done. So I talked to Roy Kibbe, who was the city editor. I said, why don't you come down there? It's a great thing happening. We don't cover that kind of stuff. There are no guns or drugs involved,
The ratings, right? Yeah, they got to get the ratings.
Terrible.
But I think, John's touching a really important point, and that's what I like about Zeitgeist, too, is that you're putting out this idea that the media is directly hiding, which is that there is this common, we have common ground, we have common spaces, we have public spaces that are supposed to be shared, but what we see, when I got to San Diego, I was shocked, and I realize now it's the impact of the military, but all the public spaces are really treated like they're not public spaces. And so, for instance, City Hall isn't even considered public land. It's on private land, and people were getting arrested for registering people to vote because it was private land. I've never been in a city before where there were no public spaces, that all the public spaces were actually owned by private corporations. And I think we have to push against that there is this idea of the commons, that, a lot of the old villages, that center area was owned by everybody. It wasn't owned by one person. And so I think what we could do here in the United States, and especially in San Diego, is push forward that idea of the public commons. It's called the doctrine of the commons. This idea that stuff should be owned. So we have right now a massive sale of public property by Civic San Diego, just massively selling off all public properties. And no one's saying anything about it because in our mind we're saying, oh, it's Civic San Diego, they can sell it. No, that's public land. Where is our say in that? So, just changing the language is really important.
Has it been public land since the beginning of San Diego as a city itself, or was it brought in through its cheat or a domain?
So a mixture of ways. Sometimes the city took it over by, just because it was abandoned, but a lot of that land was public from the get-go. Like a lot of Old Town was considered public land. And then it became a public park, and then that idea of it being public land was gone. Like you had to follow all these rules now and things like that.
This came to a head in San Diego when Occupy was occupying the downtown, Then they put the police in there to move people around.
The police during that? Oh no, that was the trust.
Logan, but the picture looked like it was in front of the stadium.
There was Occupy in San Diego?
It was like a little city within the city for a few weeks.
Yeah, Occupy. So Occupy, most of the other Occupies, because I did an Occupy tour, were on public land. San Diego was the only one where the City Hall said this is private land, and it was. City Hall sold that land to some developer who owns City Hall. I find that crazy. That's San Diego.
There's a real attempt to move backwards with the Trump administration trying to take over, for instance, the Veterans Administration, which has been more public, to make it privatized, and then go for Medicare and Medicaid and some other things to straighten out the imbalance that they've given to the big one percenters with the tax plan. The next step, and they're talking about it, is going after these entitlement programs. Social Security might be next.
George Carlin said it best. It's a big club, and we're not in it.
So we could do I'm all about public theater. And we just take over a plot of land somewhere downtown San Diego. We stake it as public land, and we don't leave it. Like one of the parks, maybe Qualcomm Stadium, which is kind of...
Like a squatters' right type thing? Or?
Yeah. Not even squatters' right, just take it back. We get arrested, and we go to court, and you make your public pitch. It's our land. And it's not even our land. I actually don't even agree that land should be owned, and I don't know if that's part of the, to me, I love that Native American idea that it's land that we have a privilege to use, but not a right.
Yeah, that's one of the facets is we promote access to things versus ownership of things.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, I think the typical idea is like a camera somebody would take with them when they go traveling. They often they go on vacation once or twice a year. So you don't really need to own a camera and have it sit on your shelf for 9 months out of the year or 10 or whatever. That, it could be used by multiple people. So and that's a hard concept, I think, for a lot of people to get past, is the idea of not owning anything, but having access to everything. Just tough. Any other questions, comments?
Is there a local website that people can go to? Matt? You know it's tzmsandiego.org, right? Yeah. Okay. tzmsandiego.org. It goes in more depth in case all this is on your graph. So basically, this organization's been around for a while, so we've done a really good job on the website. If you get a chance to just dig in, there's a lot of links, there's a lot of things to read. It makes it a lot easier to understand in case you think we're trying to move towards like a Wall-E Skynet type of world. But basically, the current economic system hasn't been working for a while. There's people like us that think that we can do better, so we're trying to do that. And the train of thought has been passed around for a while, and society is getting better. AI is getting better. A lot of things are advancing, and we're slowly moving towards a better type of society. But obviously, we're trying to push it to where we can start taking care of more people, like the homelessness downtown, like little things like that. It's just a matter of just waking up and just getting our shit together. And that's what our job is, trying to do, wake people up.
Absolutely. And then stepping outside of our comfort zones, coming to the realization that, you know what, this is a failing system. It has been for quite some time. And, we're reaching certain tipping points. So, rather than being passive spectators, we're starting a conversation. I am by no means an expert. I don't hold a PhD, and I could, and I don't have a dissertation to share with you. But, with that being said, I'm not afraid to, get up there and speak what I believe to be my truth. And, regardless of whether I feel or not, it's neither here nor there. Immanuel Kant, the categorical imperative. So I want to go ahead and start a sign-up sheet if anybody's interested in maybe getting an update, following us, or perhaps maybe even joining in the conversation, because everybody comes with a lot of very important ideas. And, I value, your time. And, perhaps maybe we can continue this.
I wish Zeitgeist, say, 10 or 15 years ago was a little stronger in San Diego when the transition was from the military and the base was being transformed back into the city's ownership. It was a national movement. It was written into legislation in Congress to turn such a facility over to the homeless. In San Francisco, they accomplished it. Here, it was for 2 days, all of the homeless support groups were there talking about how to do this. And then the mayor's person came up and said that the neighbors wouldn't allow it here. And they turned it back over to Corky McMillan to make billions of dollars out of this transaction. Instead of having it solve the problem in the city, some of the real serious problems of homelessness, which could have happened. But we didn't have the movement here in San Diego, they do in some other cities, to try to see if that was accomplished. There may still be some future opportunities if we ever got ourselves together.
I think we should keep it going. You know, it's funny. I jokingly say it, but in all seriousness, though, I am actually a former gang member. You know, meaning gang signs, certain colors. We enforce violent social hierarchies with that's my former gang, and I say that and it's almost sort of sacrilegious in a way. Because the elevated position has been given in our society, but considering the reason why people join in the first place, it's really not that different than why say somebody might fall into another gang. It's just that this one offers you the opportunity to go to school afterwards, if you survive it, and maybe some health care. And while you're there, a place to stay, and something to eat.
Guaranteed job.
Yeah, a job.
I think it's going to take spreading our tentacles out a little bit. Zeitgeist has been here for a good while, and it needs to grow, and maybe seeing some commonality with some of the other groups that have come up since then. Certainly the Green Party, too, has been here for a while, and has some of the similar types of tendencies or values. I think we need to start looking at that, and how do we get together and see what we have in common.
I agree. Are you affiliated with the Peace Resource Center?
Say it again?
Are you with the Peace Resource Center?
I'm on board.
Oh, okay. Excellent. Cool.
I've only recently come back into activity. The last several years I've been taking different parts of the recent and I'm 82 now, so it's really people of your age group that I would like to help get involved in this. My body's going to last too much longer, so this generation and so forth that we're really grooming to make the change, the fundamental change we need. But I'm there to help support.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys for coming. That's up with the sign. But there's cards, one little card that has our information when we meet here and everything. So, good.
Killed it.